Hello, Mr. Jaimine. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi Vivek, thanks for getting me in.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Bored because of this lockdown period. Sitting at home, surfing, playing games. That's it.
Okay, that's cool. So, before we get in, can you please introduce yourself? You already did on my previous podcast, but still, for people who don't know you, can you please briefly introduce yourself?
Uh, I'm Jamin. By my profession, I teach. By hobbies, I'm into reading, writing, and thinking. And I'm writing a book on Buddhahood. I do graffitis. I have my own YouTube channel. And I think you can just search by writing Gemin Triggerer, and I think you can see a lot my graffitis and media coverage. I think that's pretty good enough for me to be introduced.
Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, so before, how you got into Buddhism, like how your journey started from being a Hindu to a atheist, and eventually becoming eventually adopting Buddhism.
Yeah. It's my personal choice to become a Buddhist. I was not influenced by anyone else. It's my own volition that led me to choose Buddhism. There are few pretty reasons, there are some structural reasons, there are some personal reasons for me to choose Buddhism. The first thing is, I'm very much astonished and amazed that Buddhism does not have the philosophy of casteism. And I think casteism in the Hindu society has been pretty much rigid and discriminatory. So that was one of the factor for me to turn on towards Buddhism. Second thing, Buddhism is not a religion. I think it's more like a philosophy. It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking, the way of behaving, and it's pretty much individual and social centric and makes things pretty much cool and sorted. And the third thing that impresses me about Buddhism is that it's very much closer to the philosophy of agnosticism. So agnosticism is something that is neither religious nor atheistic. It's almost like a middle path. So adopting this situation of middle path has led me to balance lot many things within myself, pertaining to my own psychological factors, sociological factors. So this is what made me magnetic towards Buddhism. So this is it.
Okay, so okay, that's why you left Hinduism, right?
Yeah, I've left. I am officially a Buddhist since 30th December 2018. I took Diksha at Chaityabhumi in Dadar, and I didn't inform my parents about it because obviously it's pretty much riskier. But then they turned out to be liberal. They have accepted with time, and I have been writing blogs on Buddhism. I am planning to do a course in Buddhism, and I have been active in WhatsApp group on Buddhism. Trying to counsel people, etc., etc. So it's something that has changed the way I was, and I think somewhere you need a spark that triggers you for the better.
Yeah. Okay. So have you also looked into other philosophies like Confucius and Laozi and all that?
Yeah, it's like before pro-liziting myself into Buddhism, I did a comparative analysis of various other theism like Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Zoroastrianism, and then I trickled down to Islam, Sikhism, Christianity, and Buddhism. And in the end, I think Buddhism made a lot much common sense. It's less radical, it's less fundamentalistic, and it's more flexible. And the religion is pretty much closer to my political and economic leaning also, and that is a philosophy of libertarianism.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So, um, okay. So I don't know much about Buddhism and Buddha. So can you please help me know the story of Buddha and anyone who want to know like who was Buddha and how he became so enlightened.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. I think the story of Buddha is very much relatable to all of us in some form or the other. And so I would like to start by clarifying certain misconceptions that Buddha was not a god, he was not a messenger, and he didn't promise anyone heaven and hell. He was pretty much a sorted guy who made many things simple, clear, and very much succinct without, having any weed or any drugs as such. And I think this guy was a pretty much a good teacher. And the term Buddha is very much Buddha or the term Buddha is a title actually. So basically, it's a title where you acknowledge yourself as an awakened one. And so he was born in Kapilavastu, which is now today in Nepal. And that time it was located in ancient Bharat. So he was born in a Hindu family. He was a royal prince. He was Kshatriya by caste. And at the age of 29, I think he led an ascetic life and became a monk. So the story of Buddha starts with his, around 600 BC, 650 BC. It's around 2,500 years back from today. So his original name was Siddhartha Gautama, and Gautama was his surname, and he belonged to Sakya clan. So he was born in a luxurious family. He was born with a golden spoon. After 7 days of his birth, his mom Maya, she died, and it was anticipated that either he would turn out to be a great king or either he would turn out to be a great monk. And his father was very much apprehensive and anxious. What if he becomes a monk? Then who will carry forward the legacy of his kingdom and empire? So he kept Siddhartha, the baby and the young Siddhartha, in his palace for almost 29 years. And he also got married. He also got him married at the age of 18 and 19. And around at the age of 20 or 29, he gave birth to a boy named Rahula. His wife was Yashodhara, who was pretty much supportive, who was pretty much loving of Siddhartha. And he was raised by his stepmom, Mahapajapati, who was also a maternal aunt of Siddhartha Gautama. So his father, King Suddhodana, was very much anxious of him not leaving the palace. And with time, I think he grew up, and then Siddhartha asked to go outside the palace and check out how the world is, and as such, his father permitted it. And fortunately, Buddha came across four different incidents. He saw an old man, he saw a sick man, he saw a dead man, and he saw a monk who was meditating under a tree. So this was the turnover event in Buddha's life, and he underwent existential crisis after seeing it. He was very much stressed and depressed and anxious, and he had raised many fundamental questions for which he was looking for answers, and he had no answers. He was not highly convinced. So one fine night, he took a last jibe at his wife, Yashodhara, and son Rahula. And then he decided to find answers on his own by himself. So he became a monk. Then he came across two teachers, Udaka, Udaka, it's some Sanskrit name, Alara Kalama and Udaku Ramaputta. So these two guys were his teachers who taught him the art of meditation, the art of thinking, the art of knowing as such. And he was trained by them. But still, Siddhartha Gautama was not convinced by their teachings and philosophy. So he decided to pursue wisdom and knowledge on his own. So he traveled across many jungles, mountains, rivers, and all. And then he came across five pupils who supported him in his journey. So they started meditating under a tree, and Siddhartha Gautama decided to not eat and drink unless and until he finds the answers. And he started meditating. Then one fine day, a lady named Sujata gave him a porridge looking at his condition. Siddhartha Gautama had it. And on having it, his other five colleagues, who were also the students, who were also supportive of his path, they ditched him and they left him. And Siddhartha Gautama came to the conclusion that self mortification alone cannot be the means to end your suffering. So self mortification is leading a completely ascetic life, which we see especially in other monks belonging to Jain community who completely disown the worldly affairs and material affairs. So Siddhartha Gautama gave a suggestion on how you can end your suffering using middle paths. That is, neither following self mortification means and neither falling over luxurious means. So one has to balance both the dimensions, because you need to also take care of your body. If you don't take care of your body, if you starve yourself to death, you won't be successful in your mission. So that's how Siddhartha Gautama, was emerging as an upcoming Buddha.
Okay, interesting. So, do you think he pursued that path because he was rich? So, if anyone who is financially suffering, it is very hard for him to realize the meaning of life and all this stuff. Because if you see these stories of a lot of philosophers, they were rich and then they pursued a path to enlighten themselves.
Yeah, I mean, contemporarily, if you look at Mahavira, who was 4 years elder to Siddhartha Gautama, who was also a Kshatriya. Uh, so it can be generalized in this way that only people who were having a golden spoon or people who had access to a better life were able to pursue such path. But somewhere I feel this is also illogical to make a hasty generalization on coming to this story that only rich people can afford to fast. So fasting or finding answers are not so compatible. uh, I think it's a choice whether you wish to fast or not. However, there are certain social conditions in our society that does not, give privileges and accessibility to the ones who are underprivileged to accept spiritual means. For example, there is a school in Buddhism, Navayana Buddhism, which emerged in 1956 in India, that focuses more on social and political liberation of the underprivileged class in India. And spirituality, something in ancient India, has been the work of the privileged class. But I think it was Buddha who revolutionized the way spirituality functions. I think he decentralized the idea of spirituality, and that's make him more liberal. Because spirituality in that era, I think it was only enjoyed by the privileged class, people who had access to Sanskrit language, people who were born in the upper caste were blessed to pursue spiritual affairs. But I think Buddha was the one who decentralized the idea of spirituality. I think he made spirituality accessible to those who were not privileged to speak Sanskrit and those who were not born in the upper caste section. So this is where the Buddha inspires us in some form or the other. Yeah, Vivek.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So what were the main philosophies that Buddha left behind?
I think he has many interesting perspectives to offer. The first one is that uh, he gives the idea about suffering, what exactly is suffering, how suffering emerges. And I think the idea of suffering is something that starts with the learning of Buddhism. I think the idea of living the life since our childhood, it starts with the realization of life and suffering. And there were many other teachings like Eight Noble Path, which I think we will cover in this session, and how they are all compatible in our day-to-day activities and uh, things and all. Then he talks about emptiness. He talks about mindfulness. So it's like a simple Google search can, inspire a lot much knowledge about what Buddhism exactly is. So the major teaching would be that his discovery of four noble truth, that there is a suffering, there is a cause behind suffering, there is an end to suffering, and there is a way to end suffering. So this is his first teaching. The second teaching is the Eight Noble Path, that one can live a life without suffering, without aversion, without craving, without attachment, and without expecting, or without being greedy or desirous or vicarious. That is why adopting Eight Noble means, and those are right action, right thinking, right efforts, right mindfulness, right livelihood, right perspective. And when we adopt all this, and when we apply it in our day-to-day life, when we make this Buddhism more engaging, I think life becomes pretty much easier. Then he also talks about mindfulness, that how one can be conscious all the time, and how his consciousness can make him a very de-stressing person, and how it can help him fight anxiety, stress. And I think today pretty much our society somewhere has failed to address the issue of mental health. So I think Buddhism has a lot to teach to all of us in 21st century. And his philosophies were pretty much easier, pretty much able to grasp. It's very much acceptable as such. And his philosophies are mostly in Pali literature, and from Pali it got translated into many other languages, because Pali was another language that has challenged the hegemony of the Sanskrit at that time.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with suffering first. So why Buddha believed that life is all about sufferings?
Uh, as soon as we are born, we suffer. It's because we are craving for something. We are mentally conditioned to believe that we need to have something, and so we are not able to distinguish between need and wants, and that's why we suffer. Is because we are pretty much conditioned by the social conditions, economic conditions, the prevailing political conditions, making us to stay desirous, less mindful, and it ultimately affects the way we think as such. So suffering starts with our birth, and our goal in life should be to free ourselves from the suffering. And that stage and state is called nirvana. So nirvana is the ultimate goal, that is freeing ourselves, our body, our soul from the vicious cycle of rebirth and death, and also from the suffering. So we suffer because we are attached to things that we have or that we own. And I think we pretty much believe that all these things are never changing. We also make a logical error by believing that all things are going to be the same, they are permanent, they are eternal, but that's not the case. So we also need to be mindful at the same time that anything that moves or anything that lives is bound to change, and nothing remains same. The more we accept it, the less we suffer. And I think it all starts with mental suffering. I think we suffer more mentally than physically, and mental suffering is more dangerous than any kind of suffering.
So we can end the suffering by being in nirvana, that is emptiness, right?
Yeah, nirvana and emptiness are two different components, but they are quite synonymous. Nirvana is a state where you are completely liberated from things that don't matter to you anymore. For example, you may be having certain goal and objectives in life, but that's fine. But if you are attached to those goals and objectives, and that makes you less human, and that makes you less apathetic, I mean, less empathetic and more apathetic, then ultimately you are following the circuit of suffering. So it's a rat cycle that we need to be getting rid of. Otherwise, we continue to suffer, not ourselves, but also the people around us. And that's how it leads to communism of suffering. And our goal should be to liberate ourselves from this communism of suffering.
Okay, so can we end?
And yeah,
Yeah, continue.
yeah, yeah. The other point is the emptiness, which I was talking about. So emptiness is a philosophy that says that nothing has any intrinsic existence. Everything that we see is empty. It's like whatever the living thing and non-living thing are. Even this whole universe is just empty. There is no intrinsic existence of anything as such. So emptiness theory was more popularized by the Mahayana Buddhist Nagarjuna, who also was from India. So it's a mighty mind-blowing theory that helps us to understand that the form is empty and the empty is form. So there is nothing that exists as such.
Okay, so do like Buddha believed, can we put end to the sufferings?
Yeah, Buddha could end his own suffering, and then he popularized his wisdom and learning to his fellows, to his fans, and to his students as such. He didn't teach the technique to all. He was quite patient and he was quite silent most of the times because he wanted to make this issue pretty much clearer and comprehensible to those who are actually ready to understand what he says. So he himself at that time took his own discretion on teaching. So it's not as such that Buddha could speak to all, and he could also inspire many people on compassion, on practicing compassion. He was the one who fought peacefully against casteism, against animal sacrifice, against idolatry. He raised many scientific questions. He himself was not convinced of many other things, and he never imposed and enforced. So I think the very first way to end suffering is to not believe in the idea of imposing your will on others. And I think we can learn a lot on this, that the idea of suffering starts when we start imposing or not believing in the idea of consent. And I think in today's time the idea of consent is very much important. The second way, where we can relate the idea of Buddhism, I'm just trying to simplify all these things because I want my audience to understand what exactly Buddhism is and how it is relatable.
Yeah.
The second way of suffering is to follow the Eight Noble Path. That is by following the mindful way of thinking, behaving, acting, living, putting the right efforts, and doing your best without expecting anything and not asking for more. You should be gratified with what you have and value it, because that's more important. And happiness, sadness are also kind of a mental constructs. So you build this mental construct when you tie happiness to something, or when you tie sadness to something or someone else. So we suffer when we are expecting something in return, or when we are giving meaning and interpretation of happiness and sadness to someone or something. Yeah, Vivek.
What were Buddha's view or philosophies regarding happiness? Can happiness be achieved, or is it something we have to practice on our own too?
Yeah, there's a quote by Buddha which I think is very much contemporary. Uh, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. So some people believe that once they do this, they'll be happy. But happiness, I don't think, is a destination or any railway station that you just have to reach there. I think you can just be happy by being living in the present. So when you live in present, or when you learn to live in the present, you are happy. So you are sad only when you are living in the past or in future. So this is what the idea of happiness is in Buddhism.
Okay, and do you believe that the idea and philosophies of Buddha is misunderstood in today's world?
Yeah, to an extent, I think he's pretty much misunderstood. He's considered as some avatar of Lord Vishnu, which is not the case. Even in Hindu Shastras, it is proven that he was not a avatar. I mean, not a avatar, but it's later on the social priest made him an avatar of Lord Vishnu because they were not able to compete with the popularity of Buddhism. So I think Buddha was not the avatar of Lord Vishnu. Second thing, Buddha was not a god. Many people worship him as a god. Unfortunately, that's not the case. If Buddha were alive and to see that he is worshipped as God, then he would be surely depressed. The third thing is that Buddha was not a messenger. He was not a messenger between Brahma and the world. I think he was just a simple human being who pretty much made life simple, who taught us how to, unfuck your life without giving a fuck to the life. That's what I understand by his existence. And his teachings is very much popular. Even Albert Einstein, Alan Watts, and many other scientists, philosophers are still adorable of Buddha, because this guy was pretty much ahead of his time. And, he can be a good moral science lesson. He can be a good sociological teacher. He can be a good philosopher in our day-to-day curriculum.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So I always hate this question, like Buddhism is like fourth most popular religion today in today's world. So how do you see that? Like many people are worshipping Buddha as a god, even though he defied that purpose. Still, people are worshipping him as a god, and it is becoming one of the biggest religion in the world.
See, the firstly and the lastly, it's like people have a choice on how do they pursue Buddha. What I shared is my opinion, and obviously, I am subjected to my opinion. When it comes to the demography, I think it's the fourth largest religion in the world. That's because people have been quantified into a particular sect. But I think treating Buddhism as a religion is not fair enough. I think how people do things in real is what defines the religion. So all of us are some brand ambassador of religion, right? Muslims are the brand ambassador of Islam. Hindus are the brand ambassador of Hinduism. So people who believe in the idea of Buddha, or people who worship some form in some form or the other, uh, are the brand ambassador of their religion. So basically, all of us have a collective duty to play here, because all of us are watching each other. And I think 21st century is more about the clash of civilization. So somewhere there is a fundamentalism, because politics mixed with Buddhism, and it is seen in Sri Lanka. It was seen, in Myanmar during the dictatorship Raj. Somewhere Buddhism has got mismanaged, and somewhere I think people need to recheck and rejuvenate themselves when it comes to practicing the fundamentals of religion. So all of us are representing our beliefs. This principle also applies to the atheist, and I think atheists are also equally responsible for what they believe in. Like we have seen atheists from Soviet Union and China who may not believe in religion, but they worship government more religiously. And I think the governments have killed more people than people have killed people. So somewhere I think all of us are representatives of our own faith system, and our behavior is the biggest teacher.
Yeah, for sure. So how Buddhist philosophies are correlated with libertarianism?
Yeah. See, the idea of libertarianism is to believe in the idea of freedom. Okay, uh, freedom from intervention, freedom from dictatorship, freedom from tyranny, freedom from enforcing our opinions, views on others. So the idea of libertarianism is to believe in the idea of uh, freedom. So once you believe in the idea of freedom, that you have every right to live the way you want, as long as you are not harming anyone else, as long as you are not imposing any of your wishes on others, as long as you believe in the idea of consent, as long as you believe in the idea of privacy, you are a libertarian. So the idea of libertarianism is also different from the idea of liberalism. Liberalism somewhere, adjusts with the government and justifies the means of government intervention. Whereas libertarianism is completely compatible with capitalism philosophy, somewhere with other forms of socialism. And I think it's a very vast ideology. It's a very vast movement as such. And coming to on par with Buddhism, I think somewhere Buddhism also propagates the idea of libertarianism. For example, the idea of gifting. So when Buddha used to seek alms to feed himself and to feed animals or his community members, so his idea of gifting is that we should always be willing to donate, willing to volunteer, and willing to support, irrespective of our identities, sexuality. And I think Buddha was quite open to admitting people to follow his teachings or to believe in his learnings. So that makes him a libertarian of his time. He believed in the idea of consent. He believed in the idea of discussion through peaceful means, resolving conflict through peaceful means. So Buddhism and libertarianism are compatible here. Uh, when it comes to the idea of gifting, as I was saying a few minutes ago, so when you are gifting someone, you are doing it of your choice, right? There is no one forcing you. And also the idea of greed is also addressed in Buddhism while gifting. So if somebody offers you anything, you take it. And when you ask for more, it makes you a preta. So preta in Pali language is nothing but a hungry ghost with a small mouth and a big stomach. And I think this also represents the idea of greediness. And I think if you are relating the idea of Preta in modern times, I think the government is a Preta. So the government has a very small mouth and a big stomach, and they continue to feed themselves. You could see how people suffer due to mismanagement of government policies. And I think the government benefits a lot from mismanaging the policies, because that gives them an upper edge during election and make electoral promises, making people to blindly believe in the idea of authority. So Buddhism does not believe in the idea of authority. It does not permit any state action. So Buddhism is much more alternative, just like how libertarianism philosophy is alternative to the mainstream economics. So I think Buddhism is completely compatible with libertarian philosophy, as both of their principles match a lot.
Okay, so how can we help the society spreading the idea of liberty by Buddhism?
Uh, it's like anybody can be a Buddhist. I'm not saying it from religious point of view. There's a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese monk who is settled down in France. He says that in his monasteries there are many Catholic priests, and they say that Buddhism makes them a better Christian. So Buddhism makes you a better human being. And it's not that one has to be a Buddhist to follow Buddhism. I think anybody who wants to become a better human being, whether it's a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh or a Zoroastrian, and if they want to become a better Hindu, Muslim, respectively, then I think Buddhism can inspire them. Just like how we do not practice democracy all the time just by voting for the democracy, right? I think democracy is one of the most overrated philosophy in the world. It's completely tyranny of the majority. So, in order to become a better human being, or in order to become a better Hindu or a Muslim or a Buddhist, I think the teachings of Buddha can inspire a lot because it helps us to understand the idea of self, and then we come to the realization that there is no self, there is no soul. It's all mental construct, and there is no empirical evidence of the same. Also, the idea of freedom. The libertarianism philosophy talks about that you have a freedom to own things, that you have freedom to yourself, to your body. And when it comes to Buddhism, which becomes much more bit harder when it comes to the idea of detaching from the idea of self. So when you talk about self, the self is nothing but the pride, the accumulated value of ego. So once you believe in the idea of ego, you automatically become arrogant, stubborn, and that affects your mental health, your physical health, your social health, and material wealth as well. So somewhere I think here libertarianism and Buddhism do not collaborate, is because libertarianism believes in the idea of private property, whereas Buddhism disowns the idea of self. Thus, the idea of private property is debunked in the philosophy of Buddhism. So, this is where they do not collaborate. Otherwise, I think most of the times the features, the distinguishing features are quite synonymous.
Okay, so I want to touch more on the idea of private property when it comes to Buddhism. What you mean when you say you don't believe in the idea of private property or idea of self?
Libertarianism believes that private property helps you to grow. So obviously, when you own something, you have an incentive to look after, and you obviously are rewarded for what you do or for what you own. Like you have right to your own labor, you have right to your own land or resources, and when you own things, you are more efficiently managing it. But then when we start owning things, we become quite much self-boasting. We become greedy enough, and somewhere we do not know where to draw the line. But that's how the libertarianism philosophy justifies the idea of greed, because it's more responsible greed rather than irresponsible greed. I think in the system of communism, the greed is more irresponsible because all of us pay for the cost of someone else. So this is where the libertarianism debunks the idea of collective greed or the idea of communism. So somewhere I think libertarianism is justified that they should be having the right to own property, right to own their things, or right to have a free enterprise without getting interfered, and as long as they are not harming anyone. And whereas coming to the Buddhism, in Buddhism, when you go deeper, the idea of self does not exist. It's like you and me actually do not exist, and what we exist is a perspective of each other. And these perspectives are shaped by many other social conditions and many other economic conditions. And in the end, the body is temporary. The soul does not exist because the universe does not exist. It's like an empty. It's the form is empty. So it's very much complicated. It's like one cannot easily decode Buddhism in just one podcast show or by reading one book. The one who goes much more deeper comes to an end or comes to a conclusion in Buddhism or through Buddhism that this whole world is an illusion. The idea of self is an illusion. So we do not exist. We are existing because we have given meanings to the idea of our existence. So we interpret accordingly, and thus we suffer a lot because we are attached to the idea of self.
Okay, and do you believe we can achieve the stage of nirvana?
Yes, it's possible. The term impossible itself says I'm possible. So I think nirvana is not something like that can happen after the age of 70 or 80. Like Buddha attained nirvana before he could die. So he died at the age of 80 by eating a poisonous food. But I think he attained nirvana long back, and nirvana is a stage where you are in the prism of Buddhahood. So this concept is like where you are completely compassionate, where you are not affected by the self-suffering or any other form of suffering. You in fact become highly selfless, highly empathetic, and you have completely realized that everything that exists is bound to change. You are moreover pragmatically able to accept that there is no self. All your karmic actions are determined by your choices and behavior with others and with yourself. So nirvana is a process. I think just like how in the philosophy of libertarianism, market is a process. So market is a process means that we are continuously engaging in some form of production, consumption, distribution, and transaction-oriented activities. Similarly, in life, I think nirvana is a process where we are continuously trying to become better. So we always want to become better because uh, that's why we incentivize ourselves, we motivate ourselves. But then coming to the ultimate stage of nirvana, I think one can be achieving enlightenment or getting access to the insight or wisdom at any point of time, at any place, in any way. It's not that you have to follow particular pattern to set yourself free from suffering. I think you can liberate and emancipate not just yourself but others also. That's what Mahayana Buddhism states, which is also one of the important school in Buddhism. That when you realize and when you become aware of things, you are completely enlightened, and when you make others enlightened, you are achieving Buddhahood. So these are all various concepts, glossaries in the theism of Buddhism.
Okay, and do you think like we can achieve that while following material things as well, or do you think we have to sacrifice other things to get enlightened or achieve nirvana?
Uh, See, the idea of Buddhism is following Madhya Marga, which is following the middle path, a balanced path. So it's not that you have to completely disown material life. I think material life is equally important for you to survive. But when your goal is to only survive, you forget the art of living, you forget the art of thinking. You just become another herd in the community and you end up following things without questioning. So that's what material life has done to us in the name of consumerism, in the name of consumption, in the name of success, in the name of all those things that we see on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I think material life is necessary, but then it depends on what are you choosing from the material life. I think we can just have essential necessities for us to survive, to help us pursue our path. If you're just attached to material life, then I don't think the scope of spiritual life will, sparkle in your curiosity or in your chapters. So I think borrowing some necessities from material life and leading a spiritual life, having a conscious understanding of life, reality, death, of people, of illusions, of consciousness can be a very great thing. It can help you a lot to understand, make things simpler, and you are least likely to be affected. The more you accept the realities, the least likely you are to be affected. And that is what Buddhism is about. It addresses all those important questions that we have inside our mind. So I think Buddhism makes you a spiritual being with human experience rather than a human being with spiritual experience.
Okay, interesting. So I want to touch on point of consciousness as well. So how Buddhism see consciousness?
The idea of consciousness, I think most of us are ratiocinate by the Western philosophies. I think Buddhism is the ancient psychology, and I think Buddha was also kind of a psychologist in his time. And most of the psychotherapies and psychological theories are all borrowed directly or indirectly from Buddhism. If one were to do an Oriental and Occidental analysis, so the idea of consciousness in Buddhism is the idea of being aware, the idea of self-realization, and coming to the conclusion that this consciousness exists. Okay, it may be infinite. There may be energies that's spark from one being to another, but it cannot exist forever. So the idea of consciousness is completely mind blowing, and it is not believing in the concept of other Western therapies, that it is just about having a perspective, or it's just about knowing the idea of oneself. I think the idea of consciousness in Buddhism is more about being aware, and that helps you to become an enlightened person.
Okay, interesting. So I want to touch on several other topics as well, but I think this podcast, like I, we can't learn everything about Buddhism. And I think you learn more by practice than by teaching, right?
Yeah, I think one can, practice meditation daily without chanting any mantra, or without devoting to any idealism, or without, worshipping anyone. I think the idea of vipassana was given by Gautama Buddha, and the idea of vipassana is about focusing on your inhale and exhaling. That's it, not thinking about anything. And I'm sure it will be a pretty much interesting experience. Nowadays it's like people want quick success, quick results to mental health issues as such, but I think with all patience and virtue comes your results. So I think one can start practicing behaving nicely with others without expecting anything, and one can disown the idea of attachment, and work more towards becoming a better human being by just not every new year, I think by every new minute and every new second. So that's how the idea of rebirth is in Buddhism, that you are reborn every new minute, every new second. So I think one can trickle down much, decentralize himself a lot, and become a better human being. The books by Thich Nhat Hanh, on like, suggestions like The Miracle of Mindfulness, Anger, Fear, You Are Here. These books can be a good motivation to the idea of Buddhism in a very simple language without becoming religious as such. I think people need to be more scientific. I think we need to be more scientific towards the understanding of the life and reality, and that can make us achieve greater heights rather than flying plane into the
Mhm.
buildings.
Also, regarding meditation, do you like? I sometimes believe that it is also kind of a drug. So, what do you think about that?
No, I don't think meditation is a drug as such. It depends on how you look at drugs. Yeah, meditation can be a psychological drug to make yourself better, right? We use drugs to become better, or maybe to hallucinate ourselves. But I'm pretty much disappointed looking at certain, sections of the society who use drugs to meditate, or who use drugs to gain enlightenment. Or that's like using Tinder to find a girlfriend or to find a true love, but that's not the case. It can never be the case. So I think meditation is about focusing on what you're doing. It's not that one has to sit under a tree, or one has to close the room and meditate. I meditate right now. Right now, I'm meditating while speaking. It means right now I am aware of what I'm saying, or what I'm doing, where I'm looking, how I'm, viewing the reality is. So I'm aware. So when I'm aware of my things, I'm conscious. When I'm conscious, I am able to be mindful. So you can be mindful when you are focusing on inhaling and exhaling and observing things as it is. You should just see things as they are. When you try to define them, it affects you, and it disappoints you in the some form or the other. So meditation, the philosophy of Buddhism is completely mind blowing. It's completely different from what we have learned in Hinduism and elsewhere. So the idea of meditation in Buddhism is about just being aware of your actions, of your thoughts. So when you're aware of your thoughts, you know how it is helping you. If it is not helping you, you need to change your thoughts. You need to not become a dead fish in the stream, in the river stream. You need to question those thoughts, and that can help you to overcome overthinking. And that's how you go about it. So the idea of meditation in Buddhism is quite simple. It's only about focusing on your inhale and exhaling, and becoming aware of what is happening with you, with your neurons, with your body language, with your everything. So it can make you more conscious, it can make you more mindful rather than mindless.
Hmm. Okay, so before I think you already touched on a lot of topics, but yeah, before we continue, can you please tell us what you said that you are writing a book, so what it is about, and
Yeah, this book Buddhahood I'm publishing shortly. Uh, I want to give this book uh, to my special person who is born on 25th July. I think one can easily make out who is she.
Mhm.
So I think Buddhahood is a book which talks about how one can achieve the stage of nirvana, or the stage of enlightenment, how one can become more mindful in our day-to-day activities. It's not that you have to completely take a break for 10 days and it's like you just you know disown cell phones. One can still be mindful using cell phone. Yeah, one can still be mindful by being in the pool of social media toxic culture, but it's all about how you affect yourself rather than letting others affecting you. So simplifying the principles of Buddhism, I'm writing this book.
Okay, interesting. So it will be released in July.
Hopefully, if I'm alive, because I have not predicted and anticipated the future, because I'm in present, I'm living in present.
Okay, so any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Uh, I have this quote by Buddha, and it's very inspirational. That inspires me a lot. Just three words, okay? Mind is everything. So it may just look like a simple statement, but if one logically decodes it, he or she will realize that mind is like remote control. And I think we need to channelize the buttons well in order to see the best program. Otherwise, we'll be completely subscribing without getting any joy. I hope my my analysis gives an in-depth understanding of what mind is everything, because everything starts and ends in the mind. Whether it comes to thinking about your past, thinking about your future, whether you wish to choose to live in the present, whether you wish to become a good human being or a bad human being, it's all in the mind, and your own mind is responsible for everything. So this is where I think Buddhism and libertarianism collaborates, where you are responsible for your own actions, and I think no one else is, whether it's anyone. All the social conditions, economic conditions that appear to us, I think we have a choice, and I think the real power is in how we respond and react. That is what Buddha taught us. So I think mind is everything.
Do you believe in the theory of mind is consciousness?
Uh, well, I have no fixed notions as such, but I'm still a learner. It's not that I'm a monk yet, but I think I leave this the podcast and the discussion to the people to decode and make their own conclusions.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, thank you, Mr. Jamin, for coming on, and yeah, please let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. I think I have taken a break from, I think a permanent break almost from Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I think the social media culture is quite toxic, so I've taken a break. Plus, my girl is possessive, and so it makes sense for her to make me sign out. But however, if people want to stay in touch with me, I think they can watch my YouTube videos. I think that's pretty much important that they try to do a logical anatomy of things that they see on my YouTube channel or in their own lives. I think that's fair enough. I think I am no more interested in getting in touch with the people. It's just like all of us should be minding our own business. That's the art of liberty. That's the art of Buddhism. That we should completely unfuck ourselves and not get fucked at any point of time. So I hope my answers are not too philosophical. It's making a
Yeah,
lot much sense is because I'm completely stagnated with what I have seen and etc.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, okay, thank you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek, for the invite. Have a nice time.
You do. Bye.